Commission. That's what this is telling us. Certainly in respect of the promotion of these 5 officers. Your question must be, as you're listening, how long has this been going on? How long has this been going on? Okay? So, essentially, she says, Justice Henry says, and we quote, taking everything into account, I can only conclude that the Public Service Commission did not maintain the seniority lists mandated by Regulation 20 and has not done so during the currency of the employment of Elroy Boucher, Agnes Noelin, Joel Poyer, Conroy Daniel, and Kedro Peters in the civil service or at all. I find that it did not. I find also that therefore the Public Service Commission did not have the necessary facility to ensure compliance with Regulations 20 and Regulations 19 subsection 1, 2A and 3B, and that it could not and did not comply with them during the reference periods. End of quote. Understand why it was important, friend, and why we're still asking you to get hold of the judgment and read it. It is a stinging indictment of the mode of operations of the Public Service Commission. A stinging indictment. You see, when some people make statements, the minions and others are sometimes anxious to talk about how you're inciting this and you're inciting that. But when employees make a case of having been overlooked and have to go to the nation's courts to find justice, because remember, you know, the initial argument by the Public Service Commission was to put a stop to this. It should not be handled by the court. It should be handled by the Public Service Commission. This body, it should have been left in these people's hands. You hear what the judge said? Because I will get this information because it went to court. These people had written letters citing their concerns about having been overlooked. They got nowhere. That is how they end up with the Public Service Union taking their matter to court. And thankfully there's a God above that allowed for a judgment that the court has jurisdiction. The Public Service Commission dared to suggest the court had no jurisdiction. This would have been left in their hands. This. What we are being told. I find, therefore, that the Public Service Commission did not have the necessary facility to ensure compliance with its own regulations. And that it could not and did not comply with them during the reference periods. Yeah? You understand this? These are people's lives. These are people's lives and their livelihoods. And this is what we are hearing about how you treated them when they made application in respect of their concerns over how they were being treated in their various positions. How long has this been going on? How many more are in the pipeline? We were told initially that Public Service Commission has as many as 23 people complaining. But after this, we can expect many, many, many more. And don't be surprised if the next thing you hear, the teachers' union follow the same route and go to court. Don't be surprised if you hear that the Police Services Association end up going to the same, Police Welfare Association end up going to the same. Don't be surprised. Because you must be bothered. You must be bothered. Yeah? You see, the way in which the judge put her judgment must have us all decidedly bothered about fair play in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the public service. You know, the judgment went through each case. Yeah? And you know, it's a frightening thing. Right? Here's the case of Elroy Boucher. Okay? And his job. In his case, the hospital administrator, Mrs. Grace Walters, testified. This is the judgment we're reading from a quote. Hospital administrator, Mrs. Grace Walters, testified that she is not aware that there are no assessments of Mr. Boucher in the case at the bar. She averred, and we quote her, "We have some assessments of staff in the engineering department," end of quote. She maintained that the staff in the biomedical department has been assessed in this regard, and she stated she has a few assessments of certain persons of the department in her office. She claimed that she has one copy of those while the others were sent to the ministry. She testified that no one in this case asked her for a written assessment of any of those persons. Yeah? The judge goes on, "I draw the irresistible reference that the Ministry of Health has neither prepared nor maintained annual reports in respect of the work undertaken by Mr. Elroy Boucher during the currency of his employment there, and that the failure was deliberate and intentional." This is the judge's judgment. That the failure was deliberate and intentional. Yeah? In the case of Mr. Poya, right? Mr. Ryan, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture. Case of Mr. Poya. This is what the Justice Esco Henry wrote, and we quote, "Mr. Ryan could not say how many times those assessments have been done since Mr. Poya joined the service. He said that ideally, those assessments should be done monthly. but he did not know how often they were done. And he would have to check the records of the forestry department. He indicated that he would have to check the system to see if Mr. Poyer has ever been evaluated. He said, and they're quoting him, they're quoting P.S. Ryan, "I am aware that the Public Service Commission has not supplied a single evaluation of any of the officers in this case." End of his quote. He stated that while there is an internal evaluation process where we utilize the monthly, annual, quarterly report to evaluate the work of officers, they have not been provided in this case. But Justice Henry went on in the very next paragraph, and we quote, "Mr. Ryan was brusque in his delivery. His nonchalance was remarkable, given the sensitivity of the issues under consideration. He has accepted that materials which were ordered to be disclosed were not supplied to the Public Service Union. This is a blatant breach of a court order and of the Public Service Commission's duty of candor to the court. In essence, Mr. Ryan has admitted that the annual confidential reports stipulated by regulations 19 and 27 are not prepared and maintained by the relevant officers in his ministry. This is in direct breach of the law. This is in direct breach of the law." Yeah? You know, Justice Henry then goes on. "Although Mr. Ryan's admission removed the need to draw adverse inferences, I make the observation that the monthly reports described by Mr. Ryan do not satisfy the requirements of regulations 27 and 19 in respect of the annual reports. I conclude that the Ministry of Agriculture's breach of the regulations was deliberate and intentional." Deliberate and intentional. You know, and essentially, we go down the list. Yeah? And it's essentially the same that we've concluded. You know, it is interesting. Right? So we go through this report and understand that there are challenges galore with regard to the case made. Right? So what is interesting at the end of the day, you know, her conclusions are critical for us. And because of time, we want to go to the order that she made in the end. And we get to that momentarily. Right? Because we want to let you have a full sense of what this thing and the implications for all of this. Right? And like I say, it's very, very unfortunate that this has had to be done, because we believe that people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines need to know how the system has been working, or not working for that matter. Right? So what is the order at the end of the day? What are people due? So Justice Henry makes the following, issue the following order, and we quote, "It is declared and ordered, 1. The Public Service Commission has failed to comply with Regulations 18, 19, 20, and 27 of the Public Service Regulations in respect of promotions for which officers Agnes Llewellyn, Elroy Boucher, Joel Poyer, Kejo Peters, and Conroy Daniel have been eligible during their respective periods of service in the public service of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. 2. The Public Service Commission has failed to observe the principles of fairness, transparency, and objectivity in exercising its functions under Regulation 19 of the Public Service Regulations in respect of promotions for which Agnes Llewellyn, Elroy Boucher, Joel Poyer, Kejo Peters, and Conroy Daniel have been eligible during their respective periods of service in the public service of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. 3. The Public Service Commission is ordered to establish and implement forthwith and maintain an efficient, transparent, and effective performance appraisal and promotion regime within the public service, including robust and functional monitoring and corrective mechanisms in accordance with the stipulations of Regulations 18, 19, 20, and 27 of the Public Service Regulations. And 4, the Public Service Commission shall pay to the Public Service Union, pursuant to CPR 56-13-5, costs to be assessed on application to be filed and served on or before 31st January 2019. She concluded, "I am grateful to Learned Counsel Joseph Dells for his written submissions." Esco L. Henry, High Court Judge. You know, dear friends, what we have cited here is extremely, extremely embarrassing. Extremely, extremely embarrassing. And one wonders why it is we have not heard of resignations en masse from the Public Service Commission. Why not? But we ought to be concerned about what happens in the various departments and ministries where these people were working. What happened there? Are those in authority in those segments not also responsible? You see, when some people claim victimization, the usual response coming from the leadership of the government is that there is no such thing. There is no such thing as victimization. So, if there is no victimization, then what the court has brought to the fore in dealing with these 5 individuals, what is it? If it is not victimization, do we lay it at the feet of incompetence? Do we lay it at the feet of incompetence? You see, it is predictable. It was always going to be predictable that the Prime Minister, who very early in his very first term declared that the prime in Prime Minister means first. Remember that? The prime in Prime Minister means first. And that he therefore carried a responsibility for everything that happens. You know, the President of the United States, they have this talk about the buck stops here. The Prime Minister knows that. The buck stops there. Ultimately, he has to carry that responsibility. So if at some point he was one of those saying that Eustace was beating up on the poor public servants, then one would have expected that he would have been particularly sensitive to ensuring that under his watch, nobody beats up on the public servants. But if you were listening to Margaret London's program on Friday, the 11th of January, you would have heard her play tapes of the same Prime Minister talking about public servants and more or less suggesting that on the eve of elections, even on the eve of the elections, there are public servants who are attempting to do this or do that or do that. They will be dealt with. That was the inference, that they would be dealt with. But the public servants you love so much have not been allowed to engage in any direct collective agreement with your government. But you love them. The public servants that you love so very much. Labor love. Labor love. And for the time being, we have these 5. And you can bet that more will come forward. And that they will not only ensure that their union take their matters to court, but that they will also make sure that it reaches the media. So in a very real sense, it's 2000 coming back to life and coming back to haunt you. That is what is happening. Because these things have happened under your watch. And what people are concerned about is how long has this behavior been going on in the public service. There's a part of the report that speaks to an officer going to try to find some of the documents, the so-called quote-unquote seniority list. But the dust and the state in which the documents were kept, and the fact that some of the documents, the ink had already faded, etc., etc. Trying to find the seniority list that were thought to exist. And that the Public Service Commission defied a direct court order. Yeah? So to the extent that all of those other groupings were not able to help the Public Service Commission do better in terms of the legal requirements as directed by the court, means that we are in a sad state of affairs. So who is the minister responsible for the public service? Since 2001, who has been the ministers responsible for the public service? Who? You see, we expect people to say they are surprised. We expect people to say we didn't know. But if you are in charge of government, this is as much an indictment of your mode of operation relative to governance as it is of the individuals in the Public Service Commission and in the various ministries and departments that were involved. But what is the most frightening component of all of this, dear friends, is what would have happened had the court not ruled that it had jurisdiction to hear the case as brought by the Public Service Union. What would have happened to these 5 and those who are to come after them? What would have happened if they relied solely on the Public Service Commission? What would have happened? This is good governance, ULP style. It is not the time for anybody, Prime Minister or anybody else in the government, to pull themselves into a corner and say, I was not aware. We were not aware. In these Caribbean countries, and in fact, in many of the independent countries across the world, people have a strong sense of how government operates their governance. They expect that a new administration, successive administrations, would want people in place who they feel are loyal to them. You're seeing that in the international arena today. But how you get people who are loyal to you in those positions has to be done in accordance with the law under which you are operating. And in the case of the public service, in accordance with the public service regulations. You can't do things, and then when eventually you are called to account, it is found that you have not been in compliance with your own regulations. And that the court has to tell you and demand that you change your mode of operations such that similar charges cannot be brought against you in the future. You know, this is St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Why would anyone, and what would motivate anyone to deny people who work an opportunity for promotion? Why would anyone want to do that? Why would you not go out of your way to ensure that your procedures adhere to the fundamentals of fairness, of transparency, and of objectivity? Why would you not want to have those lofty values characterize your mode of operation? Why not? But there is a sense in which, dear friends, over the last 17 or so years, we have seen the emergence of a culture dictated by, we should own everything. We should own the jobs too. Remember that? We should own the jobs too. It's not enough for us to own the party, to own the campaign. It's to own everything. And it's the reason why Just Another Look pointed to the fact that perhaps the New Democratic Party backed itself into a corner, because if the Unity Labour Party was able to hold rallies at the airport site, the NDP should have applied for the airport site to hold rallies too, because it's a national project. It was not a party project. Or was it? So perhaps the NDP missed the boat. But now that this is becoming ever more clear as to how the system operates, perhaps the NDP needs to engage in a certain amount of introspection. Not that you want to behave like the Unity Labour Party behaved in 2000, but certainly you have to align yourself with the cause of the Public Service Commission, given the ruling of the judge. Because this is an indictment on the entire system of governance in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. If you couldn't get transparency, and still can't get transparency in respect of expenditures for the Argyle International Airport, this is consistent with that. You can't get transparency in the public service in respect of promotions of 5 officers, and God only knows what is likely to come next. The issue of transparency and accountability and objectivity must be endemic to our new culture. The system must be seen to be fair. Because this is not a political issue. It ought not to be a political issue. It is a national concern, because you have children, many of whom are expecting to work in the public service. Is this what you want them to get? Is this what you want them to get? But you're listening to Just Another Look. You hear it only on Nice Radio. And today, dear friends, the 12th day of January 2019 marks 4,400 days since the disappearance of J8VAX, piloted by Dominic Gonzalez, with Rashid Ibrahim on board. Disappeared without a trace, coming from Canouan to St. Vincent. But it also marks 2,987 days since the disappearance of SVG Air J8SXY, piloted by Cyrus Blackram, called out to perform a mercy mission from St. Vincent to Canouan. Never got there to complete the mercy mission. We got a report on the disappearance of SVG Air J8VAX. We're still waiting the report on the disappearance of SVG Air J8SXY. Why is the minister responsible for airports and seaports seemingly anxious to publish in full the report on the disappearance of J8VAX? And yet, we have no such action taken with regard to the report, if any, on the disappearance of J8SXY 2,987 days ago and counting. I will leave you there, friends, as always, mindful of what transpired on the 19th of September 2008. Patricia Bowman in bad weather driving to work and having her car crushed by a wall, dislodged perhaps by the weather. But our system, our jurisprudence, leaves her dead. As far as they're concerned, she's dead. If the husband wants to make a case, then, well, so be it. Until such time, nobody is prepared to pay any sort of compensation for anything, because that's the law. It is ruled that there's not enough information emerging out of the inquest or inquiry or what have you to identify specifically who were responsible. So if Mr. Alban Bowman, Patricia Bowman's husband, desires to seek justice through the legal system, he has to pay for it. But what bothers us is that in a Christian society, those who are responsible for the insurance company, those who are responsible for the house whose wall it is, and our erstwhile honorable, venerable legal fraternity have not found a way to address this situation in a manner that seems sufficiently fair. Welcome to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Enough said. You've been listening to another edition of Nice Radio's Callaloo presentation, Just Another Look. Just Another Look is an exciting... Just Another Look is an innovative, exciting, albeit decidedly provocative, and yes, certainly controversial socio-political analysis of issues of a local, regional, and international nature. Just Another Look is heard only on Nice Radio, first aired on Saturdays at 6 p.m. Repeat broadcasts on Sundays at 9 p.m. You can catch us on the World Wide Web, www.niceradio.info, or check out our Just Another Look blog, www.justanotherlook.com. And of course, you can check us out on Facebook. Enough said. I am, of course, Keith Joseph.